In 1987, Stanley Kubrick finally made his follow-up film to The Shining, which he made in 1980. The film was, of course, Full Metal Jacket. 7 years between those two films. Was it worth the wait? That's the question. The obvious answer is, for anyone who's seen the film, yes, indeed it was. Not to give the game away, as I often do right at the beginning of my reviews, but Kubrick has made, or did make, essentially one of the best war films ever made. It's a tough watch, must be said. It does show not particularly the best side of humanity, but that's kind of the point. It's an anti-war film, which I'm sure has been said many times, and we've seen an awful lot of those kind of movies. But yeah, I feel like this is one of those which many other war films have tried to ape since. The film has essentially these 3 acts. So in the opening act we've got the training. Basically we follow these recruits as they go through their training, and then the second act they go over to Vietnam, and there's not a right lot to do. They're not being sent into the war zone, they're just kind of being bored, wondering what they're doing there. And then the final act obviously is them being in the thick of it, losing their humanity. And the whole film really is all about that journey of them losing their humanity right from the get-go. You know, when we see the whole training sessions with this drill sergeant played by Lee Ermey, brilliantly played by Lee Ermey, I must say. He was on this film as an advisor, but when he turned up in full military uniform and started shouting out orders the way he does in this film, Kubrick couldn't resist but give him the role. Really going full throttle with these recruits, putting them through the paces, more than putting them through the paces, bullying them in fact, becomes very uncomfortable at times, and we essentially see how he dehumanizes these people. We see that never more evidently than in the character of Private Pyle, played by Vincent D'Onofrio. It's a tough watch. His character in particular is probably the most memorable thing about this film for many people, myself included. We see this guy who is a very simple man. He can't help but smile. It's like this nervous smile. No matter what's happening, if people are shouting at him, he can't help but smile, and that gets him into trouble. His lack of ability as well gets him into trouble, and this drill sergeant really just railroads him for it until it breaks him. Really breaks him. It's a famous sequence, and it's a famous scene in which Private Pyle eventually snaps and he kills the drill sergeant. It's in this moment when Pyle talks about the Full Metal Jacket. That's essentially a metaphor for these men. That's what they are. They're being sent off to a war zone as live rounds. That's what they are. They're bullets. They are designed to kill. We see this man who's just been totally dehumanized and is left with nothing. There's a scene in particular when he hides this donut in his boot locker and he gets found out, and as a result of that the drill sergeant punishes the rest of his squad whilst forcing him to eat this donut. It's a hard moment to watch because I really do feel a lot of empathy for this guy, a lot of sympathy, and just watching him eat this donut, it's like the most painful thing to watch. So much tied up with it because obviously he's got a problem with weight and his eating habits and his self-esteem, and it's all tied up in this one moment where this bully is bringing them all to the fore and forcing him to kind of be trapped in the open with all these people while he eats this donut. It's uncomfortable. It is a result of this dehumanization, of course, that none of the characters from this point on are actually all that likeable. The exception being maybe Joker, who's the main character played here by Matthew Modine. Probably the best performance he's ever given. He gets a few moments where we are allowed to sympathise with him, where we are allowed to see that he does have some humanity left. There's this whole thing in here where he wears this peace badge, which kind of tells us that actually there's a part of him that holds on to the idea that maybe piece is out there somewhere. But on the flip side of that, you know, we openly see him during his drilling, during the whole training section, that he wants to go out there and kill. The most touching moment we get with him is right near the end of the film, just after this sniper has been shot, and they find out, you know, they find that it's this young girl, and he's faced with the prospect of putting a bullet in her to put her out of her misery, essentially putting her down like a dog. That's what these men have become reduced to. They look at other human beings like animals. It's in this moment that you do kind of realise that there is something still there in him that says, you know, we can't just leave her like this, we need to do something. But the answer there is to put her down, as I say, like a dog. That's about as much humanity as is left in any of these people. And so, as I say, it makes these characters that we are following quite unlikable. Kubrick does a very good job of still keeping the tension going by putting us into their shoes, putting us into the situation they're in, you know, with the bullets flying overhead and danger at every turn. So you do feel that tension arising, but I never really feel sorry for any of these guys. I never really see them as heroes, and that's very purposeful. Like I say, that's the whole point of the film. These people aren't human beings anymore, not by the time the Marines have got through with them, by the time they've finished training them. They've turned them into a weapon and nothing more. The production designer on Full Metal Jacket is Anton Furst, who I know primarily from the 1989 Tim Burton Batman film. He did a marvellous job on that. He even picked up an Oscar for that. And he also worked on a film called The Company of Wolves, a film I didn't like really, but I did love the production design. So Anton Furst is definitely high caliber when it comes to that stuff, and that's certainly no different here. Kubrick shot the whole of this film in London, in the UK, so there are scenes that supposedly take place in Vietnam, war-torn areas, and you're totally and utterly convinced that that's where they are, and that's, as I say, down to the production design by Anton Furst. Very different score and musical choices for Kubrick here. He's prone to use classical pieces throughout pretty much most of the rest of his body of work, and here he goes for more kind of modern music. I'd say modern music of the time, you know, that was around at the time the Vietnam War was going on, and it works, you know, it works really well. The film doesn't really seem to follow the usual kind of narrative conventions. It doesn't feel like most of the films in the way that it tells the story, like particularly like with the opening act, you know, this whole training section feels quite improvised, which isn't something you would normally associate with a Kubrick film. You know, he's a stickler for detail and kind of doing things to the nth degree, you know, like take after take after take, and it doesn't really feel like that here. That is still the case though, you know, like if you look at the shooting schedule for this and the length of time the actors were booked for compared to how long they were actually shooting for, the shoot for this went way over schedule, and that's just typical Kubrick. When bullets do start flying, when the heat of battle kicks in, it is very realistic. It's very good indeed. Explosions are going off, bullets are hitting walls, and it's like a blitzkrieg, just from rifles, and it's just like, I know that when they filmed that between takes, the setup was immense. It would take them ages to reset all these squibs, all these shots on the walls and stuff. You can see why, because it's an immense amount of gunfire, but you feel it. You feel like you're genuinely in that war zone. I do think this is an incredible war film. I think it's up there with Apocalypse Now. I think it's up there with Saving Private Ryan and Dunkirk, and it's possibly one of Kubrick's best as well. I do think it's one of Kubrick's best, and when I come to my eventual ranking of Kubrick's movies, which I will do once I've finished this series, only one film to go, Spartacus, but yeah, I think it's going to feature pretty highly on that ranking list. So yeah, I give this a 4.5 out of 5. But what about you? What do you think of Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket? Have you seen it? If so, Leave your thoughts on the film below, and until next time,